So with no further ado, I've asked one of my favorite colleagues, Ann Merchant, to come and make a few welcoming remarks. Ann is, in addition to be a trusted advisor to DASER, she's the Deputy Director of Communications and my fellow instigator. Ann, come welcome us.
I will try to welcome. I'll do my best to welcome. One of the logos that's up there next to the big giant DASER logo, we've been marginalized next to that, is the
Your
science.
Font is just too small.
I know, we are small, but it says the Science and Entertainment Exchange. And really tiny underneath that, it says a program of the National Academy of Sciences. And I know that probably doesn't make sense to some people because the National Academy of Sciences in Hollywood, yes, it's true. We do have a small but mighty band of people in Los Angeles that make up the Science and Entertainment Exchange. And essentially, we like to describe that program as 1-800-I-NEED-A-SCIENTIST. And I always like to follow that by saying, no, you cannot actually dial that number. It is not the correct number of digits. Do not try that. But if you were to dial that number, if it were the right number of digits, you would reach Rick Lovard, who is the program director out there, and he would connect you to one of the many experts that we have available to us through the resources of the academies, because as we like to say, we have 7,001 volunteers. Jeff is one of them who obviously sit on all the committees that we have that are available to us that produce the work of this institution. But they also think it's kind of cool every now and then when Hollywood calls on them as well. And Hollywood thinks it's pretty cool that they can call a place like the National Academy of Sciences through the Science and Entertainment Exchange to get experts to consult on the films that they do. Since we launched in late 2008, we have done almost 800 consults on almost every major science fiction film that has released since that time, and a number of television programs, including the movie Prometheus. Now, I know that part of what we're doing here tonight is poking gentle fun at the mistakes or the inaccuracies that we will see in this film. We like to say that we are not the accuracy police. It is not our job to tell them and wag fingers and try to make them get everything right. We do, of course, encourage them to get it right, and we've certainly corrected their course in many cases. It doesn't mean that we always get them to do it the right way. John Spates, who is a good friend of ours, he is the credited writer, one of the credited writers on Prometheus, would probably, if he were standing here, say, I did get as much of it right as possible. And then Damon Lindelof came along. Now, Damon Lindelof was the writer on Lost, and many of you probably remember when Lost totally jumped the shark. Well, John would blame it all on him. That's where the science went wrong. We provided what we call a think tank. Ridley Scott called us before it was even named Prometheus and asked us to help with the science. One of the things we did, if you've seen the film, there's a lot of alien language that comes into the plot line on this, and so we provided a linguist. We provided, as part of our think tank, about 6 scientists that sat down and really helped them think through a lot of the different science themes. They did what they wanted with the science when it came down to it, and that is often the case. But I think that in many areas, the filmmakers do pay attention to us. We'll find out tonight with our panelists how much they actually paid attention to the science in this particular one, but the Science and Entertainment Exchange, when people do call 1-800-I-NEED-A-SCIENTIST, there are always experts on the other end of the phone, and we do help them as often as possible. But I'm going to let the experts decide how much fun this film is. So JD and the rest of you, you get it from here.
Thank you. So let's meet this distinguished panel of distinguished-looking people up here. To my right immediately is Jeffrey Kahn, who is professor at Johns Hopkins University. And Jeff, as a bioethicist and a person, an expert in public policy and the development of it, what's your interest in a film like this?
Well, I like film for the way it can help all of us access what are sometimes really tough conceptual issues. Maybe not as tough as the ones Summer works on, but ethical issues are sometimes hard to portray and communicate to the public. So that's why I like film, at least in general. This film, I think, is really interesting because it asks, for me, a really profound question about where we come from and why that question matters. And maybe I'll just leave it at that, because we're going to talk more about that as we go.
And then to Jeff's right is Summer Ash, who has come all the way down from New York to be with us, astronomer and the director of outreach. And Summer, I'm going to ask you the same question. As a director of outreach, how does a movie like Prometheus help you tell your story and your excitement about astronomy?
Well, actually, so watching it, it made me realize that it's very topical at the moment, because we are discovering exoplanets, new exoplanets by the hundreds almost every week, month, it seems like. And so it's really interesting to me where that might lead and what we might find out about these planets in the future, or even in the time period of this movie, which is only like 65 years in the future.
Mike Sapol, who is next in the lineup, is a dear friend of the cultural programs. Has curated several exhibits for us, including a film series called The Cartoon Medicine Show. Mike's a historian at the National Library of Medicine. What's your expertise? What do you care about movies like this, Mike?
I'm interested in cultural debris.
Aren't we all, Mike? Aren't we all?
Well, it's true. I can't claim to be the only one in that. Obviously, everyone in this auditorium joins me. But so I'm interested in reading the tea leaves. Films like this they're sponges. They register almost everything that's going on in our cultural moment, and they also recycle, live off of more enduring cultural themes. So I'm thinking about this film in terms of a longer historiography that starts with the film Alien in 1978, also directed by Ridley Scott, and maybe an example of cultural degeneration, since second film Aliens, directed by James Cameron, the third film Aliens 3, directed by David Fincher, the fourth film Alien Resurrection, directed by the wonderful director Jean-Pierre Jeunet, who also directed Delicatessen and City of Lost Children, two brilliant films, and then we go down from there. And to Aliens versus Predator, which I believe one of those films is either a Hollywood director who either went on to make video games, or a video game maker who went on to direct Hollywood films, and the distinction between those two genres is increasingly declining. And then Ridley Scott comes back for Prometheus, which is both part of the Alien series and part of a new series. The film Prometheus is about cultural proliferation, and here we have the Alien series of films proliferating wildly. I mean, there may be an Alien series on your doorstep tomorrow if you're not careful.
Good. So we have one more person. I think he's very familiar to a lot of you. Everybody's favorite ginger giant.
Hey, we didn't say we could call me that.
Dr. Ginger.
Mild-mannered.
It's Dr. Ginger.
Dr. Ginger.
That's it.
It's offensive.
The doctor or the ginger?
That's for the audience to decide.
Biologist and fellow provocateur of science during the evening. Why did you bring these nice thirst people here?
Because you guys like to party, right? Okay, seriously, who loves the new Cosmos series? Make some noise. Hands up, yes? So I want more stuff like this. And so sitting right there, you just met her, Ann Merchant. That's the reason this show exists. It's not actually Neil deGrasse Tyson or Seth MacFarlane. It's her and the Science Entertainment Exchange. And if we want more stuff like this, if we want more art, so I firmly believe science and art are on the same creative spectrum. It's just a different tool that you use to execute your craft. If we want those to inform each other, we have to have more stuff like this. We have to be able to get ourselves up on stage and be like, hell yeah, this is amazing. So we're going to slightly rib it, I'm sure, a little bit. But anyway, we want to keep being able to do this and also have great stuff that's entertaining, but also some more science for us to evaluate, which is super fun.
Thank you, Eric.
Love you, Ginger.
Let me
Need more history too, though.
Oh, look, they're all ganging up. What were you going to say, Mike? Who in the audience has seen Prometheus? Okay, for those of you who haven't, I'm really sorry you're not going to see it tonight. We're just going to play segments, and hopefully, but feel free to. Everybody who's seen it, raise your hand again. If you get lost, ask one of them.
Oh,
we'll
may
try
I
to
add
follow
something in
along.
that vein.
Yeah.
If I can see your face, you're doing it wrong. I want your face buried in your phone, tweeting, Instagramming. We want all your tweets.
What's the hashtag?
Okay, everybody up on stage, let's take out our phones and just bury it. Okay, I'm going to spend the rest of the evening looking like this.
The hashtag is DASER thirst. Seriously.
There's Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi.
Yeah, there's Wi-Fi.
The Wi-Fi password is accept. I accept the terms.
All you have to do is hit a button.
Just say yes.
Just say
Yes.
Just say
Yes.
yes.
We're about to start. Here we
Okay,
go.
with no further ado, let's go ahead and
Could I ask one more question?
Sure, go ahead.
How many people in the audience have seen the film Alien in 1978 starring Sigourney Weaver?
79.
79, sorry. They started making it in 78.
That's right. It took a while to make.
All right, good. So,
Thank you.
So we're a well-informed audience. We don't have to.
So
clue you
Prometheus,
about anything.
in a nutshell, the movie is there's a bunch of scientists who think that they have found our creators, also referred to architects or engineers, and they basically go way out into outer space and try to see if their thesis is true. So that, in a nutshell, is what ties it all together. Let's go ahead and run the first segment if we could. And we're kind of pushing. I wanted to be sure to include some of the beautiful visuals, which I think is one of the strongest things for me as an artist. One of my favorite things about the movie. So we'll just see what we have to say about this when we're done. Summer, if we could start with you. This very last image we see of the spaceship, and we get the impression that they're traveling way into outer space, very deep. What strikes you as either being interesting, accurate, or what does this reveal to us?
Well, a couple of things, because actually, first of all, I don't think I even told you this, but I'm an astrophysicist now, but in my former life, I was a rocket scientist. And I don't know of any program, government or privately funded, that could get that far in that amount of time, from 2089 to 2093. But I think they've already been traveling for 2 years. So that's literally 2 years from conception to launch. That's amazing. So hopefully that's in our future.
That's cool.
That's efficiency that we don't have now.
They obviously aren't going through Dulles or Reagan. Yeah.
That too, right. There's no TSA. But so interestingly, of course, because I'm a nerd, I did the math on the distance that they are. And they are roughly 40 light years away from Earth at that point, which, setting aside the whole issue of how you get that far, 40 years in 2 years time, 40 light years, sorry. That's just really interesting to me because so far we have been leaking electromagnetic radiation from Earth since we started transmitting in radio. Right. And we've been doing that for 60, 70 years now. And so that's essentially, we're discovering planets at much greater distances, but that's technically the limit to which anybody, if there was any life on any of those planets, that's the limit to which any civilization there could have heard from us, whether intentional or unintentional.
Interesting.
And so 40 light years is totally in that range. And actually 40 years ago, Eric prompted me to do this. I Googled. So 40 years ago, the radio, what was leaking on the radio was The Joker by the Steve Miller Band. That was the number one hit.
Yeah. Distant cultures, all they're going to see is,
Classic rock.
Tom and Jerry cartoons and The Real Housewives.
Hopefully the Addams Family.
Pretty
that's their
close by
that's
the
their
Near
introduction to us.
The Housewives, yeah. But so it's that part's hopefully realistic, or realistically in a hopeful way.
Mike, right before that section, we actually saw the scientists making this archaeological dig. Does that have other cultural film references?
Yeah, that's the part of the film where they channel Erich von Daniken's Chariot of the Gods. Some of you may remember that best-selling work of the 1970s, I believe. And that work has also a history of other pseudoscientific fantasies of worlds in collision, Immanuel Velikovsky and other things, which was a bestseller of 1950. So that's the moment in which we see the cultural imaginary that humanity has been in contact, our history has been affected or structured by contact with alien civilizations who now are promoted to the role that may be gods in mythology or some kind of theological narrative formerly assumed. And so humanity has this ambivalent and mysterious relation to visits from other planets, and which have affected our history. And somehow cave paintings from 5000 BC and paintings in Egyptian tombs and Aztec, and for Van Daniken it was the Nazca Plains and the lines inscribed on that plain, which are only visible from the air, which presumably the Nazca Indians did not possess any. But of course, Nazca Indians had a fairly, it turns out, sophisticated knowledge of geometry.
So fun fact, by the way, the large creature at the beginning, you think they'd have like a bodybuilder play that? It's actually a 45-year-old Burger King employee from Sheboygan. I'm not actually kind of not joking.
How do you know this?
Because I saw how they put them together. They're actually just regular dudes in there.
Really?
So I wanted to add something to, which was interesting actually. So 40 light years, that puts us still in the Milky Way galaxy?
Absolutely. Everything that you see.
So this is somewhere in our galaxy,
Close.
which they
In the
don't
night
actually
sky.
talk
Pretty
about.
close
You think
by.
of this as in a distant galaxy, but this is just on the other side of the black hole or something. So
No, it's not. It's on
not even
the
close.
same
Yes.
side. The black hole is
we could
so
wave
much
to them
farther
right
away.
now.
But that shows how hard it is for us to get even,
can't even
to
get
the
out of the
nearest
solar
place,
system.
How far is the
exactly,
black
let
hole?
alone
How many
far.
thousands of light years is that?
I know it in parsecs. 'Cause,
Parsecs.
You know. Wait, another
How did
fun
they do the Kessel Run? And
Don't start.
Well, let's go metrical here on
Yeah.
parsecs.
metrical.
Well, no, fun fact, astronomers don't actually use light years. I did the conversion because that seems to be something that's more tangible to people, but you go from light years to just jump to parsecs and then kiloparsecs, megaparsecs, just because the distances get so big. You just have to keep inventing bigger units.
Yeah, I wanted to say one other thing about the seeding of, I guess, the planet Earth. We're in Niagara Falls or a Niagara Falls clone.
Or if this was Earth at all.
If it was Earth at all, and it could be many planets that are seeded, and even we're never quite sure. And Ridley Scott refuses to say he's keeping that open option for Prometheus 2. But so obviously one way in which this film is a sponge absorbing our moment is that we're living in the genomic moment. So there's this dissolution of the body and travel into the body, which is a trope that we see often in CSI, the fantastic voyage through the body, and then we go deeper and deeper until we're at the genetic level. And one thing that I really like about that sequence is that DNA looks cruddy. I mean, DNA, the double helix is probably the most overexposed icon within science of the last decade or two. And here they sort of managed to reimagine it as sort of trashy, grimy-looking, corroded DNA. What do you think about that? I mean, you're more of an expert in this.
What's interesting is this idea in general that DNA is sort of the essence of us or life on this planet. As a genetic engineer, that could not be farther from the truth in many ways. It's simply a tool in the toolbox that your body uses. Yes, it does identify us in many ways, but there are so many things that we interact with at a molecular or cellular level, for example, that sort of define us. And actually be curious what you think about that, Mr. Bioethicist.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, after you finished what you were about to say, does it matter that some other beings created it and seeded us, right? Rather than it evolved through the chemical soup, right? What's at stake in the way this whole thing gets set up?
So that's the great question that we don't actually have an answer to in science is the difference that we have evolution by natural selection, the bust of Darwin out here in the hallway if you saw it. But the other question is abiogenesis. Where did life start? And we don't have an answer for that. I mean, there's many hypotheses that have been proposed.
And part of what I think, we want to tell a story about where it all began, right? Partly to get to just to the answer, but also we can't figure out how to control the future until we understand where we started.
Sure.
I think that's sort of what's all being set up, and we're all sitting on the edge of our seats trying to think about, well, what is this all going to lead to?
And I think also, I mean, there's a narrative about the beginning of Earth from the primordial soup, and that there's also a theory that that primordial soup might have been seeded by materials coming from outer space.
Called panspermia.
Panspermia. But here's a kind of intelligent, or maybe not so intelligent, design at work which flatters us as human beings to at least make us the center of a narrative. We're here for some purpose, some meaning in life, which panspermia, the primordial soup, doesn't, that we arose from ooze and we're going back there, is in strict Darwinian and evolutionary theory an accident. It doesn't really have a telos. We're not the end of evolution. We just happen to be here because we're here. We're a weed species, and we manage to tell stories about ourselves.
But so can I just say one thing? So
Sorry.
did it strike?
You can all go home now.
Hashtag sorry, not sorry.
It's a barren, empty universe. Get used to it.
Did it strike any of you that this more advanced being was sort of clunky, not finished, and couldn't speak? Does that seem right? If that's supposed to be where we are coming from, and we presume they are therefore more advanced than are we?
Well, they have spaceships, and they are very buff.
So do we.
They're so smart, they're beyond language.
Hairless.
They figured out the pillatory a long time ago.
I just figured he drew the short straw.
Oh, okay. That they're not all like him.
No, that he just was the unlucky one who either volunteered for like a suicide mission.
Or the lucky one.
So you think there are nerds and engineer nerds? He's called the engineer or the architect in the film.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and move on to the next segment so that we can keep the conversation going. The next segment, it starts with a briefing in the spaceship. So we saw the spaceship in the last segment. The crew has been in hypersleep, which I think is another thing that we want to discuss here in a second. I've got a question
Very
about
restful.
that. But for like over 2 years, they've been awakened, and now they're about to go into the briefing. And the briefing, I think, is an important thing for understanding the movie because it lays out what their mission is. You also get to see the interaction of the various scientists, the different mindsets, the different roles, corporation versus science. And I think it kind of plays out a lot of interesting things that we could talk about. So let's roll the next segment. I think it's very funny because I think from we can assume from this that all scientists are sexy, sexy hot.
It's true.
And also corporate
What's your
managers.
Okay, so it's pointing out the obvious, I realize. Jeff, I think we probably should start with you because there seems to be a lot of sort of ethical issues or questions that bring up, and especially the idea between I choose to believe, I believe it because I choose to believe it, coming from a scientist. This just opens up a lot of doors for thought. What strikes you?
Well, first one is that David has no soul and the scientists have sold theirs to the corporation, right? That's sort of one of the themes that comes out. A little starkly, I might add, it doesn't exactly come out subtly. The whole hypersleep thing, which we sort of saw them after they'd woken up, was really interesting for me. So how do we go however many billions of light years or whatever measurements
Just
we
40.
use? Right, so if we want to go further,
Still a lot.
right, it's a lot. What we can't go someplace where it's going to take 50 years and have us age at the normal rate. So if it were me and I woke up out of this special kind of sleep, I'd want to know a few things. Not like what my mission is and why are you telling me what to do, but like what's happened in the world in the 10 years that I've been asleep and I haven't aged, and maybe can I actually sleep a longer time and be further into the future? I want to know what it's going to be like in 100 years. I don't really want to know what it's going to be like in only 2 years. So some really interesting ethical issues that arise about bending the sort of fabric of how we think about what human beings can do and how we think and how we behave. Not to mention the whole thing about evolution versus I just choose to believe it's the way it is and it doesn't matter if it squares with the facts, which is a fairly profound attack on the way we think about the role of science in how we understand the world.
I've got to say that this is one of the most pervasive, and probably it's so pervasive that we don't really pay much attention to it in film, television, novels is, if only you will believe. That's, you hear that over and over again, and that's, I think, the trope that she's channeling there, is she's the moral center of the film. Noomi Rapace, who's one of the two archaeologists, scientists, and eventually she's the inheritor of the role that Sigourney Weaver has in the original Alien, of the resourceful, tough survivor who manages to prevail. And but there she is, and the reason, as the moral center is belief. If only you will believe, and that's what gives you. And everyone else kind of falls by the wayside in this, except for maybe the captain of the ship, who's played by Idris Elba. We haven't seen him yet.
We actually just see him briefly a little bit later on.
But it's also funny that the two scientists can't get their story straight, right? It's the one moment that they have to impress the rest of the crew, and the question comes out, they disagree.
Well, yeah,
right?
and that, I think, is also channeling our current kind of, there's very little
Lack of
comedy
certainty.
in this film,
Right.
comic relief, and that's channeling our, the gender role disagreement, that couples can't agree on anything, and these are the lovers who, immediately switch sides, and it turns out in the end their love affair is not sustainable for
Shall we
various
say?
reasons.
Spoiler.
That's a theme.
Spoiler alert.
That seems to be a theme in this movie in general, which is no one can agree on shit in this movie. And I understand in science we want to disagree. That's our fun. I think the most powerful tool we have in science often is saying, I don't know. That gets us to the limit of our knowledge, and we can start asking the right questions. And these guys, it's not that they don't know, it's that they don't want to admit that they don't know. Or it's seen as a failing almost.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, who here, put your hand up if you sort of ID'd with the gentleman, I think Josh is the character or whatever, that's not, in terms of how he presented it, his argument for this, why they did this. How about Noomi Rapace? Is that her name?
Noomi
Dr.
Rapace,
Shaw.
I'm told.
Anyone agree with sort of her take? Sorry?
I was too busy tweeting to watch.
Thank you.
Well done.
I'll buy you a drink. Wait, they're free.
Don't tell him
Make
that.
it two.
I asked for a vodka on the rocks. That was one of my tweets.
Straight up.
Okay, so let's move on to the next thing. I was kind of struck by the technology in this last one, where all the projections were done from Rubik's cubes. Mike,
Can I
you wanna
just
say
follow up just one point on what Eric just said is, it's not just the scientists can't agree on this film. This film, I think, also channels a moment in which there's a real breakdown of consensus in our society. So nobody really agrees. I mean, the corporate manager, she doesn't agree. The crew, they don't agree. And
Well,
no
the
one really
scientists, in the next
accepts.
segment, you'll see the scientists don't agree.
That's right.
Nobody really accepts the
Engineers.
authority of anybody on this ship, in this world. And I think that's as much about what's going on in American society as it is, and in our society, maybe globally, as it is about what the imaginary of what happens in outer space is, of course, always what's happening in our moment.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect setup for the next segment, because this next segment is the very first expedition that they go on when they land on this planet. What we know eventually is actually the inside of the alien spaceship. But at this point, they don't know that in the movie.
Before you go on, can I say something about
Sure.
this scene? Because what really struck me and what actually got me really interested in doing math, because I'm a nerd like that, is that, so they have these 6 stars that are in all the cave paintings. And they're trying to use that, or they're saying that's a view from this moon around a planet where these people came from. That is a really tough thing, to the point where I think it's impossible actually right now to actually back out where that moon could be in the galaxy.
Okay.
There's
things are moving.
something called, has anybody heard of the 3-body problem? And it's
I
not
have
a
that.
threesome. It's totally a mathematical, physical thing. But it's very easy.
4-body.
Not easy, but it's relatively straightforward and simple to calculate the relative velocities and motion in time of 2 bodies interacting gravitationally. You throw a 3rd body in that, and all hell breaks loose. We just do approximations, and granted, the approximations are still really good for the purposes. It doesn't matter to us if Jupiter's 1 centimeter to the left or the right, that's fine. But if you're actually going to try and find a place
Go to
that can
Jupiter,
see
right.
this configuration of 6 stars, and in all those cave paintings, that's from Mesopotamia, from like other places, and then the Scotland, which
yeah.
they were separated by millennia, 35,000 years.
Right.
So those things are all moving relative to each other, and we're all going around the galaxy.
There's just no truth to that.
And
There's no
Well, I
way.
think the implication there is that the people have been in contact with aliens who have maybe instructed them or coded them. There's a kind of ambiguity here about to what degree aliens are interfering. They're not just seeding and making humanity, they're also guiding us along the way, which if you're thinking about DNA as in our current estimation as being the determinant of life, if an alien is coming to the Earth and seeding it, maybe they'd have confidence that in 4 billion years we develop and we're able to figure things out for ourselves, and they wouldn't have to come back repeatedly and say, no, you got it the wrong way, go this way, go this way.
If you were spending $1 trillion to go to this place, wouldn't you get a bunch of guys who actually wanted to do it and not just?
Well,
I think I would train them. I would think I would train them before I put them on a ship.
really weird to me.
Yeah, but it struck me that they wake up and are like, we don't know why we're here.
And they were like,
They not ask.
Somebody was giving a
anyone
free
work for
drink
the
on the spaceship.
Is there an SOP on file anywhere?
Right.
Anybody?
This is why this is not such a great film. I'm sorry
Okay.
to say.
So let's move on so that we can get on to networking at some point before morning. As I was saying, the next segment is their first expedition, and we kind of selected this one for sort of the interactions or some of the things that we've already just mentioned.
Scary stuff going to happen, like horrible things.
Yes, scary, horrible things, but I think we edit that
Warning.
out.
Oh, we edited them out.
No.
Okay.
Let's roll the next segment. Okay, so the question for the entire panel, yes or no, is this a typical scientific expedition?
In science fiction movies, yes.
Oh, okay. Good.
Actually, in the future, everybody's got a case of the stupids, and
That's right.
that's what we learn.
Apologize later.
Well, I'll play devil's advocate for a second. Would it? Would it really? I mean, they've traveled light years to get here. They're under a lot of stress. They've just discovered there's life on another planet, and we may have been created by it. I could understand they might be a little stressed out. Yes?
Well, not only that, but also the enthusiasm of this far-fetched thesis proving it seems to be true.
Protocol.
How excited that must be.
I mean, I don't know.
Protocol. If I was going to a foreign planet, the first thing I'd be concerned about, aside from my own personal safety, which I think I would ask everyone to put their helmets back on, would be infecting another planet. I mean,
The other
you
way.
know, we already know that. Why don't they know that in the year 2093 when this is taking place? That seems wrong. But it's a fantasy, obviously.
It doesn't seem very careful. That much I think we could say, right?
I would say everyone has to keep together, follow orders. This is very important when you're venturing out in unknown terrain, possibly dangerous terrain, especially when there's evidence that death is all around you.
I would like to ask.
Really
So
old.
they meet their maker, theoretically, or they at least see evidence, possibly, that there's life on another planet. I mean, it's sort of...
It's exciting.
It's exciting, but at the same time, they don't really seem that excited. I'm saying, like...
Oh, you would be more excited.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, their reaction is actually
Not really
sort of-
gobsmacked.
Right, surprising. They're just sort of like, oh, there you go.
Well, to me,
There's the big humanoid.
And,
Yeah.
and two of them are running the other way, right? So meeting your maker has a double meaning here.
Right.
Right?
Good point.
They're at least the guy with the Scottish brogue, the geologist, said, I don't want any part of this meeting your maker. Good luck. You're going
I just
wherever
wanna
you
eat
Yeah,
rocks.
no, that's
I
true.
like
That's
rocks.
I like rocks.
witty, which is rare for this film, I think. but I've got to say that the
Anticlimactic.
antecedent here, that the film that I thought of, maybe most of the people in this auditorium may or may not know it, is a film called Forbidden Planet, which was made in the mid-1950s, in which human beings come to another planet, find an ancient civilization that was destroyed, and end up raising a monster that is very fearsome and destroys many of the people of the scientific expedition. In that case, since it was the 1950s, it seems like the ancient civilization channeled the creature from the id. It's a psychoanalytic problem where their fears and desires were somehow technologically created as an unanticipated consequence of their science.
I need to
Google
push
of the
us
future.
forward into the next. One more point you want to make?
Yeah.
Let's kind of keep things going because I do want to get to the end where we can have some questions from the audience. Let's play the next segment. Summer, I'm going to be interested to get your take on this because I think the visualization of this holographic star map is an amazing concept.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, and even though there's probably a great number of flaws in it, I mean, can you imagine how awe-inspiring that would be as a way of sharing, doing outreach like you do?
Oh my gosh.
Getting people excited.
I would kill for that.
Does that beat the Hayden Planetarium?
Almost. They have Neil, so it's hard to beat Neil.
Expect Neil to come out actually as a
Yeah,
sort of-
actually, I would expect Neil to be in the middle of that, sort of directing it all like this.
Some of the comments online were that the aliens had this immense, great 3D video technology for the planets, but the rest of it was really low resolution.
Yeah. Well, I was intrigued by the fact that he brought it all up playing a little pipe.
It's a nice
recorder.
interface.
Some commenters out here are saying it's themes from other movies or something like that as well, as an homage.
Was that E.T. and
Was that a map or was that a blueprint?
Third
No, I'm
Encounters,
still confused about
Fourth
what that
Encounters.
is. I almost feel like that's their grand scheme.
Their plan, right?
That is
Their blueprint.
plan,
It's not a
of
representation
the planets for
of
where
what's
they're going
on. Exactly.
and where they're up to.
So you expect the wires for the puppeteer to be
Yeah.
manipulating what our little tiny planet's going to be like.
Yeah.
Can I say something slightly off topic?
Absolutely.
So at the very end,
And off color too, if you'd like.
at the very end when he's listening to that heartbeat, so having recently had heart surgery, the first thing I would say is that guy should see a doctor. Because he didn't sound exactly like it
Who
should.
knows what's normal for him?
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that kind of sets it up. They finally have discovered that there's one of the architects is alive, and so this next segment is actually what happens after they've discovered this, and it moves things forward. So let's go ahead and move on to the next segment. You look like you need to say something, Mike.
Oh, always.
What's the first response?
I'm the first responder.
Triage.
Of course, there's so many things by this point. Are we going to show them at all the terrible monster, or are we going to spare our audience?
We're not actually going to see the
So
terrible
what
monster.
you haven't seen is those mutating, terrible things that are parasitic that get inside your body and eat through you, and then come out the other side. They might go down your throat and lay eggs. And she's the Numi Rapace character. Had sex with her partner who had been deliberately infected by the android, because the android, for some reason, is kind of perversely antagonistic to human beings, even though he's quite well cultivated and has studied all of human knowledge, and doesn't really have anyone else to play with other than humans. And she's given herself a cesarean section abortion, which are those very neat surgical staples, and then somehow managed to go into action shortly thereafter.
Because science.
And there's these horribly mutating things. So where to begin? I could say one thing. At some point, I wanted to raise the issue of who is Prometheus, and is that time to do that now?
Yeah, now would be a good
Is
time.
now the time? So the name of the film is Prometheus. We had a little explanation by the then we
White
thought
Wyman.
video projection of the multi-trillionaire owner about who Prometheus was. The name of the ship is Prometheus for some reason. It doesn't make any sense there. So my question that I posed to myself, maybe giving this film more credit than it deserves, is who is Prometheus here?
Well, let's throw it over the panel. Who would be the Prometheus personification in the movie?
Multiple Prometheuses, so we could propose a few candidates.
Prometheus.
Every time I see this movie, I get more confused as to who
What's
actually.
going on?
It's not really coherent.
Yeah, what the aliens actually did first. What are they planning to do? What are the holograms doing?
The
So-
aliens, I should say, like the original Alien, mutate through many, many stages, like some insects and other creatures that go through multiple pupa larval stages recapitulating at higher and higher levels until at the end, the alien seems to be a sentient, intelligent creature with a very large head, also still very hostile, but then so are the architect engineers seem to be very large creatures that were hostile. So anyway.
Well, Prometheus, right, wanted to put man on the same level as gods, right? That's the myth.
Right.
That's why he was cast out. So
And punished.
Yeah, and punished. So the architects seem to be the God, but human. They're the creators, but they're also much like us. To me, this whole thing about the natural order of things is really interesting, right? So the trillionaire is trying to upset the natural order of things, but it's not exactly clear what that even means, right? We're left with a kind of uncertainty about that.
Is he Prometheus?
I don't know.
He's
So
created
he
an
has
android.
Oh, he's an asshole is what he is.
But he has a claim.
True. There are a lot of
Has a claim.
competitors for that
so
title in
I
this film.
kind of know where you're going with this.
Yeah, I've already told you what I think.
But share your theory. Let's see if we can spark a debate here.
Let's say, the architect engineer character could be Prometheus. They've created humanity by seeding DNA through this pristine planet that looks sort of at Niagara Falls or someplace that's a Niagara Falls equivalent. So are they Prometheus? Now in the Greek myth, Prometheus is a titan. He's punished by the gods for creating humanity and then giving humanity fire, which is technology, knowledge, speech maybe, and writing. Bacon, all the things. And his punishment is that he's bound to a rock and his liver is gnawed by an eagle that visits him daily, and then his liver regenerates. I can relate to that, having recently gone through liver surgery. Very painful thing. And so there we see lots of echoes in the film of people's torsos opening up and regenerating but of course some alien presence. So it could be the architect engineer, it could be the trillionaire in humanity, which has created this android, which has created trouble, but that seems a little too petty in this grand scheme of things. So what I wanted to propose was an ecological interpretation. And here, the gods, the creators, maybe Prometheus, is the alien, who we don't really ever get in this film, the alien's point of view. But let's say the alien created was not just the product of bacteriological warfare by the architect engineers gone awry, but they live in other beings. They are parasitical hosts, and let's say they had an advanced technology. They're very, very smart. They have some kind of hive intelligence in which different manifestations of them all communicate. So, and that they created the architects to seed these beings, which are the perfect hosts which they could inhabit as parasites. So I'm going to vote for the alien, who unfortunately we've shielded you from, and so we haven't let you identify, if you possibly could, with the alien's point of view, which of course the filmmaker doesn't really let you do. The alien is just entirely and utterly horrifying. Other. So here I'm saying also mother.
I think what I'd like to do is, keeping that question in mind, let's turn up the house lights and let's hear from some questions from you guys. So can we turn up the house lights for us? Okay. There's two mics over here and over here. We're not going to be able to take too many questions. We only have a few minutes, but let's go ahead and get a response here.
My first thing, the moment where the alien meets the android, I thought initially of being affronted by the graven image, essentially the android to the god, if he is a god or creator. Any comment on that? Did you see that, or did that hit you?
Yeah, it sounds like he reaches out, or it, I don't know. Actually, we presume it's a male. We don't know, actually. But
Looks pretty...
well, you don't know. We don't know what's inside. We don't know how
genitals are shown.
But it touches and realizes it's not the biological entity that it likely is. And yeah, I actually agree. I think that's a very astute point.
You think he realizes that when he touches
I think
him?
he realizes this is not, and that he's not made a real, this is not a biological entity like us, that we didn't create this, they created it. And it's the only thing that can speak to us. You had to create a tool to speak to us. You couldn't even do it yourselves.
I've
Why
got to
does he
say,
destroy it?
I'm sorry.
Why does he destroy it if
Yeah.
it's not the biological?
You could
not a
fly to
threat
another planet, and then you show up.
with an android?
Yeah, and you're like sitting there and you're going, this is the best you could do.
Oh, I see.
I
He's
don't
pissed
know.
off.
I think what Jeff is getting at is I think that it's one of the reasons why I think this is not such a good film is that the death, the architect engineer who awakes, his reaction to David the robot who can speak his own language and destroying him seems to be entirely unmotivated.
Well, he's pissed off.
I think he just hasn't had his coffee.
He hasn't had his coffee, he's waking up, but I mean, I don't think that the filmmaker gives you close to any evidence as to what motivates him to do such a thing. It seems kind of just, he's big and not human, and humans, at this point we're just trying to torture the crew of this ship and all the people we know as much as possible to get to the end of the film. My interpretation.
David's not a threat, is my point.
Let's go on to another question here.
Sorry to revisit the stuff from early on, but what about the mathematical impossibility of raising the intergalactic speed limit?
I'm sorry, can you
we
speak
can't
up
hear
here?
you.
A little closer to the microphone?
Well, as it stands now, the speed limit for anything in space is essentially the speed of light, right? So, if
Yeah,
you're
which
talking-
we are nowhere near reaching yet.
Of course. So, I mean, the concept of hyperspace is just bullshit, just like suspended animation. So, I mean, how do they even... There's no real scientific basis for anything there. It's just all imagination.
there's no answer and there's no sort of context provided for any development
So
that
it's
they
just
get
a leap- it's
because
just
they
an
essentially are
assumption,
going 40 light years in 2 years.
2 years, right. So they get, obviously
going
got
like
a
20 times
five-speed
the speed of
transmission.
light.
there,
They've
so they
figured
can
out a way to go
accelerate.
faster than that.
Yeah, it's just a premise you buy into.
So you just kind of,
But
it's
they
a
still have to
suspension of
go to sleep.
disbelief, right?
Off to sleep, yeah.
Okay, good. Let's go over here.
So this is a question for the whole panel. It's pretty clear that the consensus is that this is a flawed film. I'm curious what you find is the most interesting or most compelling positive part of the film. A topic that it addresses well or interesting or at all. Just like what redeeming characteristics are there in the film?
I'll start. It's science fiction. Science fiction's job is to not necessarily be accurate, but to literally view science through a different lens, and maybe we can aspire to it and pick it apart and go, you know what, that's not how I do it. That's how I want the Google transplant in my brain this way, and I'll fly a spaceship through, accessing my mind or something like that.
My answer is that there are moments, as Summer and Jeff and Eric have indicated, of great beauty in this film. I mean, that scene where the body dissolves and the DNA is corroded, or that scene what we saw of all the galactic globes, and also there's a kind of horrible beauty of the mutating monsters, and also H.R. Geiger, who died recently.
Last Tuesday.
Of course, he created this nightmare technology and monsters for the original Alien, which this film is recycling and perpetuating. But that has a very striking aesthetic all unto itself. It's a dark and gloomy aesthetic, but even in the 7th iteration, which this film is, it still is powerfully affecting. We've actually shielded you from a lot of that, but when you see that almost invertebrate architecture of the spaceship and the technology, it's a very well conceived and imagined world. I wish the rest of the film had risen to the occasion to support that level of brilliance.
For me, it actually just made me start thinking of all these other questions that I wanted to find the answer to. So the first thing, when they awoke from hypersleep, I was thinking, well, wouldn't your hair still be growing? Wouldn't your fingernails be growing? And I wanted to know, I almost texted you to figure out what that would be like. And then finding the exoplanet system, how far away is that? Where are we in the terms of our ability to detect exoplanets or moons around exoplanets, which they did, and the signatures of life, which is something that we're on this border right now, a really cool border of being able to detect signatures, chemical signatures in the atmospheres of exoplanets that can tell us maybe if there is some sort of life form that's affecting the chemical content. And again, I actually did text you when they go into the cave. I wanted to know when they take the helmet off, like, okay, how different can that air actually be? What's our tolerance for being able to breathe a different composition? And what would it do to the body? And would we know right away? So it actually just got me really, really curious. It got me actually really excited to do more science.
So isn't that like one of the functions of science fiction
Yeah.
is to spark our imagination, to wonder what else could be? I mean, certainly we lived through space travel in science fiction before it was ever possible. I mean, so the ideal is going forward. So what's your thoughts?
So aside from bedhead, which I hadn't really thought about, that's an interesting one.
That's another way to put it.
It for me raises a really fundamental question. Why are we here? How did we get here? What's the point of our existence, which is about as fundamental as it gets? And a good film makes you at least ask that question and wonder, well, what if the answer is different than the one that we seem to believe, right, is the right answer? What if it were an alternate story? What would that mean? And what are the implications for how we think about our lives?
This movie was definitely a creation story, but completely
Absolutely.
different than anything
Right,
that we've
and
ever
really
been.
novel and really interesting for that. And we didn't, it's hard to excerpt a few pieces of a 2-hour long movie. But that to me was the real take home. And while I watched it even again, I thought, it raises some really fundamental questions. Okay, so there's a point in the film where the woman scientist has a cross around her neck, right? And faith is really important to her, but she's a scientist. Well, there's that inherent tension between faith and science, which is really at the base what this movie is about.
We're going to run out of time. What I'd like to do is I'd like to run down and listen to everyone's question, and then we'll respond as much as we can. So let's list all the questions that are in the audience right now.
Thank you. In discussing his inspiration for this movie, Ridley Scott said that NASA and the Vatican agree that it is almost mathematically impossible that we can be where we are today without there being a little help along the way. Leaving the Vatican out of that, how accurate is that a characterization of what scientists actually believe?
Okay, so we're gonna hold on to these.
That's a good
Mike's writing it down.
Okay.
Sally.
I think that one's for you.
I propose a theory. I know you opened with what the title Prometheus was really referring to, and my theory is that Prometheus is the mission who dares to seek the secrets of life from the gods who are played by the one last engineer, poor thing, who's out there and who is brought back to life. The thing is that the mission is portrayed by David, the android, who really does actively grab what he can from the engineers before all hell breaks loose.
Interesting. Okay. Over here.
I found this film to be almost exactly the opposite of what I look for in a good science fiction movie. This was a completely confusing film with tons of references to other fine films built in. I would like to just identify the first one that I noticed, however, which I found extremely beautiful, which was when the proto-engineer drops the hemisphere before he falls down the falls. You hear that ping sound, which comes through very beautifully in the super screen version of the film. That reminded me of a line from Arthur Clarke's novel, 2001, A Space Odyssey, when he said that there was the very first time in history that the sound occurred of stone upon metal.
Very nice. Thank you.
Good point.
Let's go over here.
I take all these creation stories And like your thing, your opinion is that you can't take them literally, whether it's Adam and Eve or Douglas Adams or Plato's allegory of the cave, that these are metaphor to make you think that about the big questions like where did we all come from? It may be unknowable, but where did we all come from? What is the purpose of all this stuff? And he's in the same way that the Garden of Eden story and Turtles All the Way Down story, they've given us a picture to make us think about those questions and spark an imagination. And it sparked the imagination to have gotten this 800 people together to throw rocks at it.
Well, not literally.
So he's accomplished his purpose.
Good, thank you. Good observation.
Yeah, I guess what is science or the current scientific thinking about exogenesis? So we have this disintegrating engineer. Something happened 2,000 years ago, probably the death of Jesus. The aliens decide we all have to die through black ooze being dropped on us.
Okay, thank you. Good.
Simple, yeah.
I would just like to consider the effect of, so there's 35 years between Alien 1 and this movie. Well, a little less because this was 2 years ago. But what effect and maybe suggest that the evolution in science itself, in physics and biology and chemistry, the evolution in these fields is exponential during that time period. So, I mean, I would suggest that maybe that's kind of the cause of the kind of confusion in this movie. And I just don't know if that's really been addressed in the movie. So, thank you.
Okay, so now we have everybody's question logged in.
Can I squeeze in 3 words?
3 words.
Robotic precursor mission. How different would this movie had been if they had just sent some robots? I think that would have really cut
Could
down
have saved
cost.
everyone a lot of trouble.
Exactly.
The interesting thing, even though we're not going to be able to answer in detail all these questions, we have a recording of these. And Josh, I think maybe we could actually talk about how to get these onto the LinkedIn network. So maybe we can get a little bit of a discussion that goes on beyond this. So let's have like final response thoughts if you want to respond to something that was said, but we need to kind of wrap it up.
Yeah, I'm going to wrap it up real quick. One point about biology. She gives birth to an alien. In mammalian biology, who here's a mother? Who has children? Inside of you right now are at least about 10 cells from the fetus that crossed the placenta and took residence in your bone marrow and will be there the rest of your life. You are a microchimera. You hold, yes, and that is
Sounds
true.
so impersonal.
So she carries the cells likely of that alien inside of her, which I just want to throw out
Good
there.
point.
And 2, I want to answer these questions out while I'm drinking, so I'm going to keep my remarks to that.
I agree. She should not come back to the planet Earth. But having her abortion would not solve it. I think that the issue of the film is, to me, as I said earlier, is that this film is, of course, deeply confused, but it does channel a lot of current concerns and what we didn't see. I mean, the first Alien was of its moment and tremendously successful, and this is just piling on, as I said, cultural debris. So there are lots of things to talk about because all of those shards are interesting and meaningful to us, even if they don't hold together in this film. In some other filmmaker's film and vision, maybe they do.
Summer?
I just want to leave you with a fun astronomy fact that sort of relates to where science has come since the first Alien. So 1995, so 14 years after the first Alien, we discovered the first exoplanet. And since then, I checked, there's an app for that. There's an app called Exoplanet. There's 1,780 currently confirmed exoplanets. But specifically, the Kepler mission has looked at a piece of sky that's like the size of your palm at arm's length. And currently, it's over 500 planets confirmed in that area of the sky. And if you think of how many palms it takes to cover the entire sky in all directions, that's an insane number of planets. So this is sort of crazy exponential where this could go.
We are not alone.
Statistically speaking, there's other Earths out there.
Jeff.
Maybe just two things. One, it's really hard to go out into space if you're a human being, which we haven't really talked about, but that's a big, I think, limiting factor here, but an important one for all science fiction, right? And the second, these are really important questions to keep asking. We heard some really interesting comments about the kinds of issues the film raises, and I think what's great about a gathering like this is that we're asking those questions and keep being curious about them.
Good. Yeah. Sparking curiosity. And on that note, your job now is to go out and meet someone new, network, enjoy some drinks, enjoy some music, and we will meet you on the other side. Please thank the panel.
Thank you guys.